DK quarterback for the wild card round. Jason, what are you seeing this week, fella?
It's actually not that bad.
No, it's not that bad.
It's certainly better than the running back selection.
All the positions are actually I feel like quarterback's the best one.
By far.
Yeah.
It's by far
I kind of like some of the options. I kind of think it's a little sneaky. Ownership should be spread out, I'd say, for the most part.
I think so.
Aaron Rodgers going up against a good secondary kind of will limit that exposure a tiny bit. I'd expect him to be, 30 to 40% still, but with Roethlisberger, Wilson, and Manning there, pretty fun. So let's get into it. Number one quarterback this week for you in terms of price and value. Who are you looking at?
I think it's Russell Wilson at 7K. Obviously close call between him and Aaron Rodgers, but I think the $900 difference, saving money, is certainly huge in a 4-game slate and kind of using that cash to spend elsewhere. Because for summer, for me, I'm locking Bell into the lineup. And I think if you do that and then you plug in Rodgers, you're going to have to dive down at a lot of other positions moving on from there. So I like Russell Wilson. Obviously a good matchup at home where Seattle's been much better at home in terms of scoring points. I mean, this team's averaging 28 points per game at home this season compared to 16 on the road. So they've been pretty severe in terms of the home road splits. And you look at this Detroit team still, got torched by Aaron Rodgers. I think obviously they're going to have a lot of issues with matching up with Doug Baldwin, Jimmy Graham, who I like this week. So you look at this, 78% of the touchdowns scored on Detroit have come through the air. So decent run defense. We were just kind of talking that really Rawls isn't an attractive option this week. So I think if you're going to look for Seattle to hit their team total, which is, the second highest on the slate, you're going to be looking for them to do it through the air. So 7K is reasonable. He's got reasonable stacking targets. You can fire away with the cheap guys if you want to get weird with GPPs like Paul Richardson, Jermaine Kearse, Jimmy Graham, Doug Baldwin. I don't mind Seattle kind of going with a bunch of different stacks.
So hear me out. So you throw Le'Veon in, you throw Aaron Rodgers in, you throw Antonio Brown in, and Odell Beckham. Why wouldn't you just do that?
Because you're literally just firing away with let me just go down the cheapest.
No, you can't.
Let's play
you literally
Jeff Janis and DeMarcus Ayers.
No. It's not possible. You can't do it. You physically can't make a lineup with those guys. So, in terms of Russell Wilson, as you mentioned, I like the cheap stacking options with Paul Richardson. Not Kearse quite as much. I think his play this year has kind of made his bed in terms of the future and the playoffs. I just don't think he's played well enough. I get that he's an option. He definitely is. But I just prefer Richardson. Got 7 targets last week. And I just think that's an interesting way to go with that stack. It's only, 10-4 total. But as far as that Seattle team in general, they've kind of been lying in the grass here. And I don't think a lot of people are expecting a blowout, but I kind of envision a blowout here, honestly. I know Detroit tries to slow the pace down, but much like Aaron Rodgers, I just think Wilson and Doug Baldwin can kind of eat up the secondary along with Jimmy Graham. I could see this being a big blowout, honestly.
I could too. And I think we can kind of transition just on the other side of that game to Matthew Stafford. 5,700. I still think if you're building 15, 20 lineups and trying to cover a bunch of different angles this week, you can toss a Stafford lineup in there. I'll probably be avoiding whatever wide receiver, Richard Sherman is, but obviously, Golden Tate moves around. Barman Jones is a big play threat. Eric Ebron's actually in a decent spot this week. Seattle's been middle of the road against tight ends. For me, I don't see Detroit just going in and just absolutely getting crushed. I can still see, 17 to 20 points. And at 5,700, if you're kind of in belief that, maybe Rodgers isn't going to pay off that price tag at 7.9, or you believe Le'Veon Bell is going to be the guy to own for the Steelers and you don't want to pay for Big Ben, I don't mind actually kind of going down. It's just a contrarian pivot because if it's not a lot of big scores at the quarterback position and you get a guy who's cheap like Stafford who comes within 3 or 4 of the, those top guys, you saved a lot of cash. I mean, we're looking at nearly 4K difference for him and Aaron Rodgers. So I think it's a viable tournament option, but I think if you're looking cheap, it's definitely going to be Eli Manning at 6,100.
Yeah. So
You okay over there, man? You're struggling.
Stafford is an interesting one because I think if you're in on Wilson, I think you might want to be in on Stafford a little bit as well in terms of tournament roster construction, just because if you think that's going to be a blowout, Stafford's going to throw 60 times, that's just going to be how it goes and get over 300 yards. Maybe he'll throw a pick or two, but he's probably going to throw a touchdown or two as well.
Yeah.
So I think a game stack in there is really interesting in hedging off. I don't think all those guys are going to be very highly owned with those, as we mentioned, I don't think Doug Baldwin's going to be very highly owned just because everyone's going to be trying to jam in Brown and Beckham. So I think Doug Baldwin is a really interesting guy to stack with Wilson. As far as that Packers-Giants game, what are you looking at for Eli Manning?
I mean, the price tag's really nice against a really banged up secondary. I mean, the safeties have been an issue here over the last few weeks. The corners, still are struggling. Obviously, you're very high on Odell Beckham. I am as well. I like Sterling Shepard in this matchup. So I think if you're big on Eli, I think if you're big on Rodgers, maybe jumping out to an early lead, then I'm really more looking at the other side and using Eli Manning just for the pricing discount, because I know he struggled on the road this season. I know obviously he struggled against Green Bay earlier this year. If that turns you off, for me, I'm kind of just wiping the slate clean for some of these guys. I mean, Eli Manning could turn a corner here in the playoffs as he usually does. Is an underdog where he's always kind of played well in that role. So 6,100, I mean, interesting pairing with OBJ, who I think comes in as the top wideout, even over Brown this week. But, that's always kind of a toss-up between those two anyway. So I think, 6,100, best points per dollar quarterback on the board this weekend, because I think obviously he's going to throw a ton against this defense who's just really struggled. And if you're kind of envisioning a shootout, why not grab the cheaper quarterback who kind of has, a closer ceiling to Rodgers if that's the case.
Honestly, though, these top four guys all have 25-point upside to me in a DK format. I think they could all throw for over 300 passing yards. So that makes this week really interesting. And I think, you can really diversify with those secondary receiver options to fit these lineups in. As you mentioned, Eli Manning, probably the lowest upside of those top four, but he certainly does have it, and it's a huge discount on Roethlisberger and Rodgers. We haven't talked about Roethlisberger yet. Is this an onslaught Pittsburgh week? Are you in on the onslaught? Maybe get, Brown Bell, Eli Rodgers in there, Brown Bell, Ladarius with Roethlisberger, or is this more just off and log out?
No, I mean, it is. I mean, if you're not trying to force in at least one Big Ben, Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell lineup this weekend, you're doing DFS wrong, because them at home, I mean, it's unbelievable. When you look at Roethlisberger, who's just been absolutely phenomenal at home this season, averaging 27 DK points compared to 14 on the road. Obviously, we know Le'Veon Bell works well in the passing game. You can imagine Le'Veon Bell, they might use him a little bit more at receiver this week and kind of go, because I think Miami might be preparing for the run a little bit more than they usually do, because they know that's their weak spot and they're going to have to stop it. But obviously Bell, Brown, both guys can get over 100 receiving yards. And if that's the case and you got Roethlisberger in that stack, it's going to be good things. And especially because you can use Jarvis Landry in a correlation play as well in that stack. Because I think Miami will put up, I don't think they're going to put up a ton of points, but I think there'll be enough there, maybe a garbage time situation. And I think a lot of it will go to Landry.
So thus brings us to the final area of this slate. Macho Man Tom Savage and Matt McGloin, Connor Cook. Are you taking any shots on these guys?
No, I'm not.
I think Stafford there on DK, I just don't know that it's viable. Like, what's the $700 difference? I don't know.
I just looking like
for those guys.
if Derek Carr was playing, maybe I'd be in on a Houston quarterback because like they'd have to play catch up for bare min. Like
Yeah.
it would just be kind of be by default. Like this Oakland defense isn't going to stifle you to 7 points on the board, but if Derek Carr was there, maybe there would be a little bit more emphasis. But I just see this one just being a gross 17-9 game.
Mm-hmm.
Nick
Now, Matt
three
Moore.
touchdowns.
Matt Moore, you mentioned that Jarvis Landry correlation play. Is there a realm of dimension? Is there a dimension where Matt Moore gets 18 fantasy points this weekend?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too.
Because I think if you're looking like basically this week is like it's filled with teams defenses that like outside of really Seattle can like limit points or like can limit yards and kind of can score a little bit of fantasy points, but overall they haven't been great defenses outside of really the Giants and Seattle. So I think it's just kind of like Pittsburgh might make that big play. That's what you're shooting for them to kind of balance things out. But I think overall Miami's offense isn't really that bad to target kind of as the week goes on, the more I'm looking into it.
And so we'll get into this with receivers, but I mean, if you're looking for a true GPP move, blowout or close game, Devontae Parker, obviously had that 56-yard touchdown against the Bills a few weeks ago. That's his game. I mean, if he can get a big one, you're looking at a huge advantage at a low ownership. And if if you're looking to use Matt Moore, all the Matt Moore lineups are going to have Landry. If you go Parker and Landry or something goofy like that, if you game stack that game, I mean that's a potential tournament winning combination if Matt Moore can hit him deep for one.
And although like Kenny Stills like 4 touchdowns in each of the last 4 games, not each, 4 touchdowns over his last 4. It's just he's been getting a little bit bigger role there. So I mean, these where that offense is coming from right now. If the running game's not working.
That's a good point as well. Still's a good call. 3,800. Both those guys sitting in that range. So, Matt Moore. Yeah. So I guess rounding back, give the people your top 2 quarterback plays of the week, just so we have some clarity on all that we just talked about.
I think Rodgers is still your kind of go-to guy, but I think for me it's Eli and Russell Wilson, just in terms of price considered and matchup considered. I just think, I can see one of those games where Rodgers moves the ball, 300 yards, but maybe 1 to 2 touchdowns. We get a fluky Ty Montgomery or a Ripkowski touchdown. Something weird happens. I can kind of feel that coming this week. And I think if you take that at 7,900, you won't be good, and you won't be sitting well with a lot of the other guys that maybe go cheaper at quarterback this week.
That was like last week against the Lions. Excuse me.
Jesus, man.
You watch that game.
You could be like a talk show host and just have your water.
You watch that game, and if you had Rodgers exposure, you realized early on, like, I can't afford 1 rushing touchdown in this game. And it's going to be the same exact thing here. You can't afford that Ripkowski 1-yard rushing touchdown, that Montgomery 30-yard rushing touchdown. Can't have it.
You can't afford a game like against Chicago a few games ago when he threw for 252 yards but no touchdowns.
Can't have it.
You can't have 202. You can't have that from Rodgers at that price.
Can't have it. Nope. No. So it is a risk. I do think playoff Eli could come around. I'm rooting for the Packers, but very realistic that it happens. As always, if you like these episodes, certainly give us a like and subscribe. If you want to check out this article, certainly head over to dailyfantasycafe.com. And as always, 1 point less than me, 2 points more than Jason, because I always outscore him by 3 points. So, except in the accuracy challenge in which he whooped my butt this year. So, as always, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you guys next week.